Hi everyone, let's dive in to a previous year question paper which is of year 2025. We will try to dissect it in such a way that we understand that what was there in the English section of our previous year paper. What I have seen is that there were four passages as usual. What we are expecting, the four passages. The four passages, they were from George Orwell's. The very first passage was from the George Orwell's Why I Write. It was a narrative, fictional writing. It was the passage 2. If we look at Swami Vivekananda has written this and we have picked up an excerpt from there. And then the third passage was written by R.K. Narayan, an astrologer's day. Probably you people have done this chapter in your maybe 10th or 11th grade. And the last passage was J. Krishnamurti, Right Kind of Education. All the four passages were quite intellect, and I am going to help you to understand that what there was in these passages, and I'll try to dissect these passages along with what kind of questions were there in these passages. All right, so let's dive in. And the very first thing I'll tell you that George Orwell, Why I Write, that was the passage, that was the primary subject of the passage. And when we look at the passage and when we try to read the passage in detail, what we find is that there are broad two things given in the passage. The very first thing was the writing motives in the passage. The passage was describing what could be the writing motives. The writing motives being sheer egoism, aesthetic enthusiasm, historical impulse, and the political purpose. These were the four major reasons anybody would write. And then what was the background given over there? The background was given that George Orwell, he was a lonely, there was a lonely childhood he had to go through, isolation and undervaluation of the person, and early emotional attitudes, what the child has to go through. So this is what the whole passage was comprising of, and the kind of questions we get from this particular passage was kind of a mix of everything. There were 6 questions. There were kind of 6 questions were there. And the very first question happened to be what? The very first question happened to be a factual question based on whatever you comprehend from the passage itself. The second question was the author's perspective. It was from the author's POV. The second question was based on that. The third question, if you look at, it was based on a synonym, and the word given over there for what you need to find the synonym was tumultuous. It was tumultuous. And it was a contextual meaning, not exactly what the word means. Tumultuous means that something very, hard, or kind of something which you find problematic, or just the opposite of harmony or something like that. The fourth question was based on, again, the factual based question. It was a factual based question. And the fifth question was based on inference. Though it was a lighter inference, it was not a very strong inference. It was kind of a one-liner, something is there, but it was kind of easily findable in the passage itself. And the sixth question happened to be once again a factual question. It was. The second passage, as I told you, it was taken from Swami Vivekananda's writing. And if we look at it, was the primary purpose, the primary idea of the passage was education. And I can see it from the 3 different areas, the whole passage. First of all, the core principles of education. The second being the objectives. What are the objectives of education? And the third being the curriculum. So when we look at the core principles mentioned in the passage itself, it was talking about character making a simulation and how the character is made in a person. And then the second was man making training, and the third being concentration of the mind. It was a very intellect passage. Now moving on to the objectives, what the passage was talking about, the education's objective, the very first being the strength of mind, how the mind can be very strengthful. The second being self-reliance, and the third being intellectual expansion. And third primary thing mentioned in the passage was about the curriculum. There were these 3 aspects of the curriculum given in the passage. The first one being the Western science, there was a comparison. And then the second one being the technical education, and the third, the language itself, the English language itself. So what kind of questions do we see from this particular passage. The very first question happened to be a factual question once again. There were a lot of factual based questions, guys. So that is the reason that you people need to read your passages in such a way that you retain information and you don't need to go back to the passage again and again, finding those factual information. The second question also happened to be from the factual information given in the passage. The third question was synonym, and it was a synonym but contextual. And the word which was given over there, which was asked, was assimilation. Assimilation, the collection of something. And the fourth question happened to be was once again a factual based question. It was a factual based question based on the information given in the passage itself. And then it was a main idea question. If you gather the overall idea of the passage, you would be able to answer this question very easily. And the last question from this particular passage happened to be the 12th question of the paper, is the author's assumption or the author's POV. What is the author's POV from author's perspective? You were supposed to figure it out and mark your answer in that. Moving on to the next passage. As I told you that you probably have read this story in your 11th or 12th grade, maybe. It was a writing by R.K. Narayan, and the title of the writing happens to be An Astrologer's Day. And if we look at the passage, the whole passage has these two broad ideas given in the passage. Astrologer's persona. What could be the astrologer's persona? And it is described in a lovely manner. And then the marketplace environment where the astrologers sit. So astrologer's persona, if we look at, has been given in three different mannerisms. First being the mystic equipment he carries with him, all the paraphernalia and everything. And then the sacred ash and vermilion, which he puts probably on his own head and the head of the clientele. And the last being the prophetic light, which he carries in himself, which presents his persona in a very divine manner. The second aspect of the passage was the marketplace environment. And the passage describes the town hall park in a very descriptive manner, along with the medicine and the junk sellers present over there. And the third being the vociferous groundnut vendor over there. And the kind of questions we see from here in this passage, the first one, which happened to be the 13th question of the paper, was based on, this was a new type of question, it was based on the phrase. What was the phrase given over there? The phrase was something like bright and colorful. Bright and colorful in an impressive way. In an impressive way. And there were four options given to you. You were supposed to pick it up. What is your understanding of this particular phrase? The 14th question from this particular passage was a factual based question, and also the 15th question was a factual based question. The 16th question happened to be a word meaning. It was a word meaning, not a synonym or an antonym, but it was a word meaning. The word was given and then a little elaborated meaning in the four different options were given. The word happened to be vociferousness. Yeah. Vociferousness. And what does it mean actually? It means something like you being very vocal about something. You ask on the top of your lungs about something. You present your idea or something. That's what vociferousness is all about. The 17th question was the factual based question. And the 18th question from this particular passage was an assumption based question. Assumption, the author's assumption present in the passage. And if you can figure it out, all these 6 questions were pretty easy for you to mark correctly. The next passage, or the last passage of this particular section, happened to be from J. Krishnamurti's writing. And I can say the title of the writing can be Right Education. And if I look at the passage in a broad way, I can easily say that the passage was based on educational philosophy and what kind of different qualities are required in an education or something. A little bit heavier on the philosophy side it was. So when we look at the educational philosophy mentioned in the passage, it was broadly divided into three things. First of all, understanding the child as is, the way he is, not bringing any tweakness to the child. The second idea, rejecting ideal-driven conformity. And the third one being individualized study for a particular student or a child. And the second aspect of the passage was what kind of requirements are there in terms of quality. So there were three things broadly mentioned. The very first being love and patience. The second, awareness and sensitivity. And third, strength of understanding. Now, looking at the questions which were present from this particular passage, the very first question, which happened to be the 19th question, was a factual question. The 20th question was a main idea question. If you gather the main idea of the passage, you would have been able to mark this very, very easily. The 21st question happens to be antonym based question, and the word which was picked up by the paper setter was volatile. That was the word given over there, and you were supposed to figure out what is the opposite of this. Volatile means that something which is a little bit of unstable nature or something like that. Probably whatever the options were there, if there is an option which says stable or something, would have been the right answer. The 22nd question happens to be author's assumption. It was author's assumption based question. And 23rd question happened to be an inference based question, not a very strong inference, but whatever you gather on your own. What's your takeaway of the passage? From that particular idea, you were supposed to mark the answer of this, the option. And the last question happened to be the author's POV, point of view. What is the author's assumption in that particular passage? So what I have done for you people is that I've picked up all the four passages given in the English section of 2025's CLAT exam. I tried to dissect it for you. I hope that you've taken benefit out of this particular video, knowing that what type of passages are usually come in our exam and the type of questions we see in our exam. Lot of factual based questions. If you read and if you are able to retain the information till the end of the section, you will be able to mark the answers quite easily. Thank you so much for watching, and take good care. Keep smiling. Thank you.